Hello everybody, how is everyone tonight? Well, excited to do a bit more web designing. So this is sort of a carry on from last week's session. If you weren't here last week, I will show you what we got up to. If you give me a second, I'll just share my screen. You might need to give me permission, Liz, to share my screen. So we were basically doing something called wireframes. And what wireframes are is basically the skeleton of your website. They're just quick sketches to give you an idea of how you'd like your website to look. They don't have to be neat. As you can see here, this is quite a really rough sketch. And depending on what you want in the website affects how you sort of do it in the sketch. So for instance, you have your image here, which is a box with a cross through it. That basically means that's going to be a picture. You've got your sort of straight lines, meaning that's a headline for each of your buttons, or it could be for your text in the page. And then you have squiggly lines. This means that's just going to be written content that you want in your website. And then you have other options like videos, which is very similar to the image. It's just got dotted lines on each of the two sides. And basically what I asked everyone to do last week who was here is to finish off your wireframes for each of the pages that you want to create for your website. It should have images, buttons, any of the content that you want to add in, and it should look a little bit like this. Now, some folk did it on pencil and paper, some folk might have done it on the computer. So it's good to just have that to hand this evening. And if you've got another piece of paper or you've got a note-taking device, then I would suggest you have that at the ready, because there are a few technical things we're going to go over in this session, and it's going to involve a lot of numbers. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to go through how you set up your website from the wireframe so that all the images are the right size for when you do the coding, and all you have to do is, and it should be the right size for your web page. Now, there's a few different things you have to consider when you're doing your web page. Is some images are going to be bigger than others. You might have images for your background. You might have images that are just headers, and you might just have one that are for the content itself, maybe for a blog or along those lines, or it could be just for a button. You're also going to need images for your buttons as well if you have a specific design for it. Depending on what kind of software you're using to code your website, if you're using like Adobe Dreamweaver or any of the Adobe products, you can actually get fonts that are sort of linking to your website, so you can use a whole range of decorative fonts. But there are different standard fonts if you're just using basic coding of a website, which every website has. And they're quite plain, and I'll tell you a little bit about them as we go along. So for this evening, you can use whatever you want to use. I'm going to be using Photoshop. If you've got Procreate or you're using Medibang, this should translate to the program you're using as well. So I'm going to go into Photoshop. I'm just going to make this bigger. So if you've got a program open, or whatever you're using to do this, if you just create a new page, but before you click create, we're going to do some things first.
Just before you continue, Leanne, it would be worth checking with everybody. I didn't brief them to have images ready. I didn't brief them to have a Paint or Paint Shop or Photoshop open. So you probably need to give them a little bit of a chance to do that. And anybody who's having problems, just unmic and tell us, and what you've got, and it's probably worth just going along the line and checking who's using what as well. I would suggest.
You can either voice chat or put it in the chat what you'd like to be using tonight for your program. And
perhaps they just could put in the chat that they're ready. Okay.
Yeah.
With a new page open.
We'll give you guys a bit of a few minutes to set that up. Okay,
so want us to have a specific size to start with at all?
Yeah, so you open your program and we're going to do a specific web page size.
Right. So do you want to tell us what that is?
So when there are two different sizes for web pages, you have your standard size, which is the minimum you should do your web page to. You might want to make a note of this. We're going to use a different size though. So if you are going to do a web page, you shouldn't make it any smaller than 1024 pixels wide. Now, if you're using a program like Procreate or Medibang, when you open your page, it should have a little drop-down menu sort of telling you where you can change what the measurements are in. It shouldn't be in centimeters or millimeters. We want it in pixels. So make sure it says pixels. And I'm going to type that in. And so that's your standard web size. So that's 1024. So that's the minimum your page should be size-wise. What we're actually going to work to is the most common size of website, which is actually 1366 pixels. And the height is 768. Now, these two numbers are very important because the first one, the width, always stays the same. No matter how big your web page is, the width will always be the same, and this is because of the screen size of your computer or your TV if you've got a monitor that you're displaying it on. And the height, that just basically rounds it up so it fits entirely on your screen. But you can make that bigger if you're having a scrolling site. So if your website scrolls down, then you can change the height to a bigger size if you need to. Now, if you have a resolution area on your little page tab, we want to change that from 300 to 72. The reason why we change that is because all the content is going to be displayed on a screen, so there's no need to print it. Resolution for 300 is for printing only. If you had a website that had 300 pixels per inch, it would be massive and it would take probably about a year to load. So we would work to a lower resolution, which is 72, and that's what we use for any screen-based images. Any kind of device that includes your phone, your computer, your TV, always is at 72 ppi or dpi. And so that's very important that all your images are going to be this size as well. And what that does, it helps your page load a lot quicker. And then the final thing to make note of is your color mode. So you should also have a thing somewhere on your document that says the color mode. And we want that to be RGB. We don't want it to be any other thing. So if it says CMYK, we want it to change it to RGB. Okay. And what that means is, again, it's for any screen-based images. So things like your TV, your computer, all work to RGB color. And that means that you get the colors that you want out of your image when you're looking at it through a screen. So once you're ready and you've put in all of those numbers, what we're going to do is then hit create. And what that does is brings up a page that looks like this. I have a giant brush for some reason. So while we're in here, we'll just select a nice clean brush to work with because we're going to draw some lines. So something like this would do. Nice round brush, and we'll make it black. Okay, and I'm just going to use this to divide up my page. So if you make the brush quite small, just going to bring it down a bit. And what this basically is, so that's your screen width from here to here. So that's your screen width there. Get the bell to save my life there. Oh gosh, I don't want to do that. Right. And then down here, this is going to be your scrolling page. So if I was to open this page up, this would probably be a good size for, say, like a welcome page. We don't want it to be any bigger because we don't want people to scroll. We want this to just be a massive image as people sort of go into the website. Now, a welcome page is totally optional. You don't have to have one. Most websites don't have one, but this sort of size is what you would use for your sort of initial page. And I have one on my website, which is just an image and sort of loads into my portfolio. If you are wanting a scrolling website, then all you have to do is in your document, you should have the capability to change the size as you're in the page. If you're working with Photoshop or Procreate, I believe in Procreate, you just go up to the little tool icon up the top left and go to Canvas, crop and resize, and you can actually make it longer. Don't make it any wider than this. So the width must always stay the same. So we're going to make this a little bit longer because we want this to be a scrolling page. So I'm just going to undo what I've written here. And we'll make a new layer as well. So if you're using Photoshop, you just go up to Image, Adjustments, and if you scroll down, you'll be able to see image size. Now you can change the size here. You just go to height, you can put in another number. I could make it 1000 and that will make it longer. Or if you'd like more control, you can also do the crop tool. So this little tool here is your crop icon. It's like a little square with some edges coming out of it. If you click that, zoom out a little bit, you can actually just pull your page down so it's nice and long. What that'll do is it'll change the background color, but don't worry about that too much because you can just go in, click on the background layer, go to white, grab your paint bucket and turn it white so it's all one color. So there you go, that's your scroll page. So now that we've got that, we can start to add in our content. So you should have, hopefully, a few images to work with. And I'm just going to close these down so we're not got too much stuff on the screen. Before we start, I want you to do something very important, and that is make a folder. So on your desktop, make a folder called Images. I've already made one here. But that's going to be where your website is going to find all your images for your code. And it has to say images because that's the default for when you're doing coding. Once you've made your folder, I'm going to make another folder inside that, and we're calling that Original Images. And this basically is where...
Slow down. Some of us are a little bit behind you, so could you just start the folder bit again?
Yeah, so you just create an image, folder. So on your desktop, just make a new folder, call it Images.
Mm-hmm.
Once you've done that, open it up.
So it's just a folder we're saving to, basically.
This is where you put in all your pictures.
Okay. Yeah, got it.
So inside your Images folder, you open it and then create another folder called Original Images. Now this is where we're going to store all our pictures before we edit them. And the reason why we do that is, say we wanted to use them again for a different platform, we can always get the original image and resize it, depending on what we want for it. So once we've done that, just open it up and shove all your images inside it that you have for your website. And I've just got a few in here that are kind of just random ones, but they're all quite massive images for these. So these ones, because they're the original A3 sized pictures, they're going to be really high resolution. They're going to have the 300 dpi size, so they're going to be way too big to put on a website, and I need to edit them so that they're going to fit on my website and load nice and quick, but we don't want to lose any of the quality. So once you have your pictures, I'm just going to take a random one. If you're using Procreate, okay, we might have to do this in a bit of a different order. So normally what I would do is just put the image in and resize it on the program, but because we're working across multiple different types of programs, I'm going to do it a different way. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new page. Want to keep this one open, okay? So what we can do is we can save this before we start. So if you just save as, and we'll call this page 1. Okay. And you can save that in your images folder and make sure it's either a Procreate or a Photoshop file when you do it. Okay. You just save that in there. So we're going to go back to this page in a bit. The next thing we're going to do is open a new page, which if you just go to File, New on Photoshop, for Procreate, you just go to the plus button in your main menu, and we want to do a custom one. So we go, instead of picking a canvas size, you just go to your little plus box right next to where it says New Canvas. Okay, and what we're going to do is, depending on how big you want your picture, is how big you're going to make your canvas size. So remember, always has to be 72 dpi if we're going to do this. So make sure that's 72. 2000 is quite big, so we want to probably put it around 500 for now. We can always change this. And I'm just going to do a square for now. I'll make it 500 by 500. You guys can make any shape you want, as long as it's a reasonable sort of size. So 500 pixels is probably about half the size of your web page almost. So do that and just click create, and you have your little box here. Now, because I've made the page a certain size, I can just then take a picture, drag it on. In terms of Procreate, you would just have your file and import your picture. So you import the original one, and you just make it the size that you want. I'm going to make it a square picture anyway, so I'm just going to bring it to about there. And then if you double click, that just flattens that picture to that sort of size. Okay. Once you're happy with your picture, you then just save it as a JPEG. But before we do that, we need somewhere to save it. So when you're in your images folder, we're just going to create another folder called web images. Okay, and this is where you save the ones that are for your pages. So once you've done that, is everybody okay if I move forward?
Yeah, I just give everybody a moment. Can you all on mic and just tell us when you're okay or not okay? I'm sure it would be a lot easier, and Diane, Leanne will not be leaving you behind then. It may just be me she leaves behind, of course, but some of these things you might.
I've got that.
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah.
Everybody all right? So you should have two folders in your images folder, one original images and the other one web images.
Mm-hmm.
Once you've done that, you can then save your picture. So you just go to File, Save As, or in Procreate, you can do a different thing. I think it's just go to your tool icon and go to Share, and then share as a JPEG. In Photoshop, it's File, Save As. And we're just going to call this, for what have we got here? We've got a unicorn, so I'm just going to call this unicorn glare. Okay, that's my image. Whatever image you're using, make sure it's something that you can recognize for finding it in the folder. And instead of a Photoshop file, we're going to then change this to a JPEG. Okay. And then once we've done that, we'll click on our web images folder, make sure it's going to go in that one, and then save. So when I go into that folder, it should be there, unicorn square JPEG. Okay. Now, because I've put that in there and it's a certain size, we'll go back to our original web page. And if I was to drag that in or import it in, let me, you'll see that it's a certain size as I drag it in. And that means that that's the ratio of how that image is going to appear on this web page. That's how big it's going to be. And I don't really need to change it. If I wanted to change it, I would probably say do that in the original image and just create a new template for it. So what we've essentially done here is created an image template. If I wanted an image the same size, because this is a template, we can actually save that as a Photoshop document or a Procreate document, depending on what you're using. And we can then make another folder and just call it templates. And this is where you can save all your different image template sizes for different things. And what this is good for is for things like social media. So, for instance, if I look this, wherever it is. I open it up. These are all your different social media sizes for different images. And you can see there's a lot of them, and they're all very different. Some of them are very similar, so social media websites like Instagram, your images are always going to be 320 by 320 pixels. So they're always going to be square. Now, that can be a bit of an issue if you've got, say, a landscape picture that's definitely not square. How are you going to put that on Instagram without cutting all of it off? Well, there's a few different options. You have, if I just go into my Instagram page.
Well, just hang on a sec. Could you just put those numbers up again? I hadn't.
Yep.
Thanks.
And these are in the chat as well if you guys want a copy. So you have all the different sizes.
Yeah, I was just snipping them.
So we've got Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn.
Okay. Thank you. I'm okay now.
No worries. So for instance, what can you do with a square image? Well, there's quite a few different things you could do. Now, if I scroll down, I should have one here. Here we go. So this is a landscape picture. But what I've done is I've made it and split it into 3 different pictures. But it gives the illusion that it's all one big picture. Okay, so how do you create something like that? Well, it's quite simple. If you've got the program open, go back to Photoshop, and we open a new file, and we know that the Instagram page size is 320 by 320. So we'll change that to 72 and 300, and change that to 320, and change that to 320. That creates my square image. Make sure it says pixels, and create. There's my square image right there. Now we're going to create another page, but this time we're just going to import our picture so that it is there, right? So I'm going to import one of the landscape picture, and I'm just going to, if you've got Photoshop open, you can just drag it and bring it into Photoshop, or you can just go to File, Open, and open your image. Now, because we're wanting a 320 by 320 image, what we're going to do is split up our image into squares. Now, there is a crop selection tool. If you go up to square rectangular marquee tool, and what that does is it just creates a square selection like that, and that's just the second icon down from the top. Now to deselect, it's just Control D, and you can do the same on Procreate. It's just the selection icon, and if you go down, there is the rectangle, and you can select rectangles. What we want to do is make sure that it is an exact square. So if you look at the top of the selection, there is different styles. We're going to change that from normal to fixed ratio or fixed size. I think that will give you these little size options here. What we do is we go 320, right, 320. And if I was to select that now, it creates an exact square selection like that. So now that I can do that, I'm just going to deselect. I want to split my page up. I want to split the image into square sections. So I've got that. If you don't have your ruler showing, which is this little bar at the top here in Photoshop, now Procreate doesn't have this option, which is a bit of a pain, but you can split it up based on doing a selection tool and then just kind of drawing a line. In Photoshop, we're just gonna do a guide. So to get the guides and the rulers showing, you just go to Window and make sure that they're ticked, which should be rulers somewhere. I can see it. Oh wait, no, View, sorry. Rulers should be ticked, and that'll show them up on your page. Now to get a guide, you just hold down where the rulers are and pull across, and it'll bring out a guide. And you just link that up to the edge there. Okay.
That was really helpful.
And that's basically giving me a guideline as to where that picture should end. Now that I've got that guide, I can then move along and just do the same thing. This time I'm going to put it there. Put another guide down, put it there. Now sometimes you'll probably find that your image is not exactly lining up to 3 squares. So what do you do in that situation? Well, it can be a bit tedious, but you can just get rid of your guides. And you might have to just zoom in a little bit and just pick the area of your image you like the best. But instead of just doing one guide, we're going to do create the square out of guides, like so. We select, I can do another one there. Another guideline.
How are you getting the guidelines to stay there? I can pull them out and then they disappear when I take my finger off the mouse.
I'm trying to think. They just basically, once you've taken your finger off the mouse, they should just stay. If they're not, it might be because you have guides hidden, possibly. Let me see.
Oh, I've got view guides. Oh no, I haven't. Hang on a minute. I've got view rulers. I've got rulers on.
Yeah, I think you might need to make sure it says, I wonder where it shows show, and then
Block guides. Oh right, new guide. There we go. I found it, I think.
it can be a bit temperamental, but once you've got it, that. If you remember, we went and we made a page that was exactly 320 by 320. Well, because we've now sort of made little squares out of our images, we can then just grab the selection, press Control C on your keyboard. That copies that selection. Okay. And then once you've done that, go back to your page that you created and then press Control V. And what that's done is it's pasted the picture that I've copied, but remember the picture I was working on was massive. So what this means is I'm going to have to make it smaller. So you might have to zoom out. In order to do that, the shortcut is Control T, and then you can see how big my image actually is there compared to the actual page I've created. So we're just going to make that smaller. You just drag it down. And you can zoom in and just make sure it's the same size. Okay, is everybody managing that okay?
Well, you've done that?
Yeah. It is.
Right.
How are folk finding it with Procreate? Are they managing okay, or do you need me to do it for Procreate as well? Okie dokie. The same kind of principle. Unfortunately, you don't have guides in Procreate, which is annoying. But you can kind of do a similar sort of thing using your lines. Just use them as guides if you draw a line. Okay, so you've got your image, and it's the same size as your canvas. Once we've got that, we can then save it. You just go File, Save As, and we'll call this Pano 1. And that makes it, that's the start of your panoramic image to go on Instagram. And we want to save it as a JPEG. And we'll save it in Web Images. Okay. Now keep that page open, because then use that as a template for the other parts of the image. We're just going to repeat the same process, and we're just going to go in and make sure we select the area that we want. So now I want the next part of the image. If you're using a Mac, it's Command C. If you're using a PC, it's Control C. And we're just going to do the same thing again. We're going to go back. And we're just going to paste it. That does the same thing. It's a lot bigger than before. So we're just going to grab that and okay. And once you've done that, we're going to save it again. Make sure you do Save As. And we'll call this Pano 2. JPEG. And save it to your Web Images folder. Okay. And then it's just a case of repeating the same thing again for the final part of the image. Got one last square. Just going to select it. We're going to Control C. That copies it. Go back to your canvas. Control V. That pastes it. And zoom out so you get the whole thing. And we're going to scale it down again one more time. And that will be the last part of the image. Now, because we've done should effectively all line up neat and give the illusion that it's one continuous image, even though it's actually 3 separate images. So we'll just save that and call it Pano 3. So if you let me know when everybody's managed to do that okay. Has anybody got any questions? Anybody stuck on anything? So once you have all of these, you can then put that on Instagram and it'll give the illusion that it's all one image, and you just put it in the different squares. If I go to the Instagram page, you'll see that it does this sort of thing. That's basically the same principle. It's 3 different images, but one big image. You can also do a different way. You don't have to have it all in the same post. You can actually have it as something for your timeline, where it's just posting 3 different posts, and as your timeline moves, you've got this great big image that's going down as well, which is quite a good thing to have sometimes. The only downside is when you post something, it kind of moves it around, but this image here is actually all one picture, but just split into 3. Okay. So what we're going to do next is we're just going to go back to our original web page. Now you've got the basic principle of how to size your images and how that works. What we're going to do is then split up our page so that it works with our wireframes that we did last week. So I'm just going to hide that for now. So now that we have our templates from doing the wireframes, we can then split up our page. So we're basically just going to copy what we've drawn already, but in the program that we're going to be using. So if we're using things like Procreate, I'm just going to do it using line drawings, because you can do this with guides as well. So depending on how your website looks, you might have a picture that goes across. So make sure you create a new layer to start with. So you just go down here and press this little button. I'll create a new layer for you. And we'll just rename this, we'll call this guides, so that we know this is just going to be a copy of our wireframe. What we're going to do is we're going to split up our web page into sections. So I'm going to put one in the middle. I'm just using guides, but you can also draw a line in the middle, like so. Oh, make sure I've got the right color. So I'm just going to draw a line. And then we're going to split it into quarters. Should be about there. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we're going to put a border around the outside of about 10 pixels width usually. I'm just going to do it in centimeters for now because it's in a different format. But we're just going to put a slight border around it so that we don't have anything right up to the edges. Okay. Now the next part is entirely up to you how you want to do it. What this basically acts as is your guide so that everything kind of lines up. And you can do as many of these as you want. You can even make it into a proper grid, which helps you plan out how you're going to line it up. And the way you do that is just keep splitting all these little columns in half. So you should have a load of different columns. And they basically act as a layout guide for your website. Now, I might want, in my wireframe, I might have a big banner image. So I'm going to put a line here. That's going to be a guide for a banner image. I then want to have content a bit below that, so I'm going to put a little bit of a space. And then you should start to see a gradual sort of pattern emerging. Maybe I want a bit of images down below explaining some of my content. I'm just going to move it around. Okay. So now that I've split my page up, I'm gonna put my wee image back in there. And I can actually, run right there, move this around so it lines up nicely. It should sort of fit in your squares depending on how you've done your grid system. Now, because this was a random size, it's not going to fit, but you should be able to sort of roughly gauge where on how big the size needs to be. So if we go to our, if you're not sure what size your image was, you can always check it again and just go to image size. We know that the width is 1366 pixels. So if we want to create a banner image, we can just create a new template. So just do a file new. We want it 1366. We want it 72 dpi. And maybe I want it to be 300 or 250 in height. So I don't want it to be massive. I would like it to be just the banner. So I'm going to create that, make sure it's RGB. That's created a nice banner template for my website. And it's the same principle as before. You just grab your original image that you want to be on the banner, put it into your document that you made, and just scale it up so that it fits. Can be a nice sort of fit to go on there. Okay, and then you just save that and call it banner in your web images. Make sure it's a JPEG. And then go back to your page. To import your pictures, you just go to File, Place, somewhere. It should have a Place button. If not, if you can't find it, you can always just drag it in. So you go back to your folder, go to Web Images, grab your banner, and plonk it in your site. There we go. So we've got our picture there, and you can see because we made it exactly the same width as the web page, it's a perfect fit. So it's basically the same principle. When you're doing your coding part, you'll have your pages sort of segregated into columns, almost invisible columns, and it'll be a certain size, and you basically create your image based on those columns. So this is basically what we're doing here. So it should work. And you basically just divide everything up into numbers that would equate to that. So if you wanted an image that was, say, half the size of your page, you just work out how much is half of the pixels that your page size is. So we can work that out. It was 1366 for the whole page width. Divide that by 2, and that means 683 is going to be your size for half side of the page. So again, you just create another template, and it's all about creating these templates so that you can always refer back to them and you can change the image. So say, for instance, I had a template and I didn't want that to be a unicorn anymore. I wanted it to be, let's go with a Selkie. All you do is you just drag your image in and you change it to whatever image you fancy, but it'll still be the same size as before. And that way it still stays the same size, and you just change the image content depending on what you want. It also works if you want to duplicate the same thing. So if I save that and call it Selkie Square. Now it's important when you name your pictures, because that's what you're going to be typing into your code as well. That's how your web page is going to find the images. So when you are naming everything, make sure you don't have spaces. If you do have spaces, make sure they're underscores like that, but it's better if they're not spaced. It'll be easier for you. So you just save that. And then I can go back and I can put those images in. So I've already got my unicorn square in here. So I'm going to put him here, line him up there. And then I'm going to import my new image. Make sure we're in the web images. And I'm going to put Selkie Square in there. And because I've used the same template, it's exactly the same size as this other image. It's the same for adding text. You can also do a text box with the same sort of pixels if you'd like. The difference is if you are doing text in your template, it's probably not going to look the same when you do your coding. And the reason for this is there's only a set number of typefaces you can use on a website, unless you've got a subscription to an external site that gives you those different fonts, like Typekit, for instance. It will be either plain sort of fonts like Helvetica, I think Futura is one, and Times New Roman. They're all the kind of typefaces that you get for web design. And that's because they're standard fonts that every computer has on its system. And when you're looking at a website, it's essentially using whatever your computer has to hand to show you the content. And when you have your images, you would usually upload them to an FTP site, and that's where the website finds the images to put into your website. So effectively, when you create your website, it's online. All the images are online already, and that's how it finds it and places it in there. It's very important to have your images all in one place on your folder, because that's where you're going to upload everything when you do eventually put your images online. And it must be clearly labeled. Don't be calling it strange names, because you won't be able to find it again. But as long as you have folders like these, so you've got your image folders, your templates, you can't go wrong. If you guys want me to send you any of the sizes for the different social media platforms, I can send a copy of those through to you, so you've got all different sizes. But essentially, that's how you size your pictures for different things. If you were, for instance, doing a picture that, say you wanted a logo, but you wanted it to be transparent in the background. So for instance, if I just give this page a background image, and I wanted my logo, I'm just going to hide the guides for now so that you don't see them and they're not glary. So I'm just doing a temporary background for now so you can sort of see how that looks. Right, so I have two versions of my logo design. If I put in the JPEG, you'll see that it has a white background. But for instance, if you wanted to have it without a white background and you want to change the color, you need to save it and make sure it's a PNG. If it's a JPEG, it's always going to give you that white background. So if you, for instance, create your design in Photoshop or Procreate, then as long as you've done it on a new layer, and it doesn't have a background, it will be transparent. I can't really see that very well, so I'm just going to change it to a different color. If you'd like to change the color, for instance, you've got a dark background for your website and you're using Photoshop, all you have to do is click on your image, make sure you're on the right layer. If you double click the layer, it brings up this panel. And to change the color, say I wanted that to be a white, you press color overlay and that will change it. To change the color to a different color from the default, you just click on this and then click on the swatch, and you can change it to any color you want. I'm just going to move it so you can actually see that in real time. So I want it to be white. Once you're happy with that, you just press OK. And if you want to make any other adjustments to it and you're happy with it being that color, you can just right click and you can actually rasterize the color so it stays that color forever. And that will always be white. But if you wanted to have that as an actual image for your website, well, what you have to do is when you have your square, for instance, I'm just going to get rid of these, you put your logo on your template and it should look a bit like that. Now, because this was already a PNG or a Photoshop file, and I want it to have a transparent background, then to do that, I need to get rid of the background. So if you go right down to the bottom of your layers panel, you'll see your background layer. It's the bottom layer, usually. It might not always be called background, depending on how you've drawn it. But it's usually the last layer on your panel there. And you can either untick it, and that will then change the background transparent, and that's represented by these little gray and white squares. And that basically means that that is now invisible. Or you can just delete the layer as well. I usually just like to untick it, and then that means the layer's still there if I want it. You then just save it as a PNG, so you just go to File, Save As, and you'll find PNG in the little drop-down menu, and that will create a wee PNG transparent background logo for you to add to your website or your images, depending on how you want that to work. So you can save that as logo PNG, save. You can do that in a template, it's entirely up to you. If you find when you do the coding that your image is not the size you want it to be, then you can actually manually change the image size in your coding. It's okay if you're making the image smaller, but if you're making the image bigger, I don't recommend that, because when you scale up the image, it's going to pixelate it. Now, what do I mean by pixelate? Well, I go here and I go back to this picture here. If I was to scale this picture up now, because it's so small, it'll start to look like this. You see all the pixels. Now, that's okay if you want to make it smaller, you're not going to notice that. But if you want to make it bigger, you're going to see the pixels and it's going to become all grainy on your screen. So the best way to resize your image is to always make a template for that specific size, or go bigger to go smaller is usually the way to do it. The best course of action though is to make sure your images are exactly the size that you want them to be before you do the coding part. And that leaves any complication out for your website, and it should be the size that you want it. If it isn't, then you just repeat the process and you just resize like I've shown you how to do today. If you have any questions, just let me know, and hope you've enjoyed this session for the evening. If you guys want me to send any of the images through like the Instagram social media sizes, I can do that in the chat just now. And I'll just hand over to you, Les.
Okay, thank you, Leanne. Now, you did ask people to do a bit of homework last week. I don't know who did and who didn't, but is there an opportunity for them just to show you their homework?
Yep, I'll just stop sharing my screen just now and you guys can show me how you got on from last week.
Right, so I know Jamie didn't have time. Harvey, did you have time?
Yeah, I'm very sorry, but I never did quite manage to get round to it.
Right.
Being quite busy recently.
Okay. Leona, did you have time?
I did, but it's on my iPad and I'm on this call on my phone, so I'm not sure how to share.
Right, okay. Well, you can always send it to us and we can always send it to Leanne for comments. I know Dave didn't do any, but I was a horrible swot and spent some time this afternoon doing it. So one thing I found was it was really helpful in making me think through what I wanted my website to be like. And I was having a go at, let me see if I can get it up. Hang on, I've just got to just get rid of Photoshop. Let me, no, there we go. Let's get rid of that. I just did it as a straightforward. Let me just share with you. Okay, share. I found it really helpful to actually make me think through the layout of the website, what we had. This is pretty much what we've got currently. This area about the schools is new, but so that was sort of like just the top bit of your diagram. But it did make me think about what I wanted to look at and what it might be like. And of course, now I've got a lot better understanding of how to actually size it and so on. And I did quite like the idea of having tabs to the other pages on the side of the website. I thought that looked nice. Now, when I say there's website CFG, there's all of this lot really is standard Home Art Future Group stuff. So I thought it would be nice to have one unifying backdrop sort of thing for that. And then, but I thought for everything electronic, because that is one of our brands, then that should be something else. Now, I think what I've got a clear understanding now is how to make everything electronic a banner at the top, which is useful. Does the page title, I suppose you decide where you put your page title. But I was sort of thinking that we would use video quite a lot, both in this and in the CFG ones, because for most of them, we could quite easily do a little bit of videoing to show the concept. So if this was, for example, the Everything Electronic digital art page, we could have a little video showing them doing digital art with then the texty stuff down below. But is that sort of broadly the way I should be thinking is really just my question.
Yeah, you've done a really good job so far. I think you can also add little notes, like little post-it notes next to it, giving yourself some kind of, so if you say you wanted like a slideshow of images, instead of just one image, you could have like a wee post-it note saying, oh, I want kind of 4 or 5 images here.
Yeah.
Or I want text here, so you'd probably have like a little text box next to your video. But no, what you've done so far is really good. It's the same for like things like your icons, like your Facebook and Instagram icons. You can change them so that they're PNGs as well. Some of them will have corners that are like a little like
I just didn't have, you can get hold of PNG copies of them. It's just I didn't have time, so
yeah.
so I just sort of snip them. But yeah, you know, this wasn't intended to be what it would finish look like. It was just for me to try and get some thoughts around what it might look like and what I might include on the page. And for example, on this one where we be looking at partners and funders, I thought I would want to have their logo and a click to one of their pages if they were a funder or a partner, so like Code Club or Coder Dojo. So I could see that would be different, but you know, a lot of this needs a bit more work and thought. But I just wanted to sort of get a feel for, was I thinking along the right lines? And it's certainly been very helpful now, because I really got stuck on this one about how to incorporate the everything electronic. Now, obviously, you wouldn't have this top bit here. That would go, but that whole box would go. But yeah, you know, I'd want to lay that out as a banner, I think. And now I've got a much better idea about how to do that. So that's really helpful. Because I love this logo that you guys developed. You know, you developed with the youngsters. It's my favourite thing about the whole website, I think. About just love it. I think it's a great logo. So
I think it's definitely giving you an idea of planning your website before you go in and do the coding part, and it kind of, you then know what you would like to code then, and it gives you a better idea of where you're heading with it. So it's good to see that you're putting these ideas down and you're kind of giving yourself almost like a script to follow for your coding section. And I hope it helps everyone who's taken part in these two workshops when it does come to creating your website, and you have at least something that you can refer to, which makes it a bit easier.
The other thing I was going to say is that this is, because we've recorded these, I will put up both of them on our video page, and so I'll send you links to them. So if, like me, you got a little bit lost in certain sections, then you will be able to go and have a look and scroll through and find the bit you wanted, so that you can find it and refer to it. And I'll send you that after we finish, once I've had a chance to upload them to YouTube. Okay. Any questions? Okay. And if you could, folks, it would be very helpful if you just drop me a line with some feedback, because we have to give feedback to Meet and Code, who funded this. So if you could do that as well, that would be very helpful. And thank you very much, Leanne. I think we could all unmute and give you a bit of a clap. So any questions just before I kill the link? Okay, well, good night, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
Good night.